welcome to this talk. So Bill gave me the impossible task to condense a 1-hour talk in 20 minutes, and I'm already bad in delivering 1-hour talks. So I have no idea how this will work out. Well, I'll do my best, so you'll probably get a gist version of what I'm usually talking about. And just one remark before I really go into the talk is if you really want to have the full version of the talk, just go to YouTube and type in live after microservices. You will find that it's a 1-hour version with a lot more of reasoning and context about that. As I said here, we only will have time for the gist version. My name is Uwe Friedrichsen. I'm CTO of a company that you most likely don't know by any means, because it's a German company, and well, we're not in Germany here. And well, okay, enough about that. Only thing that might be interesting is the SlideShare account, because you can download the slides if you like them. And so what I'm going to talk about is, okay, no, that's one too much. Here we go. Microservices, or the life after microservices. I mean, the team of this conference is APIs, and very often these are based on microservices. You're building them using microservices. So you said, yeah, well, I'm going to pick up microservices. A little bit of work, but yeah, I'm putting in that effort, and I learned it, and yeah, cool. And of course, you're delivering that using Docker, because you deploy that as Docker image. And so you also picked up Docker. Yeah, cool. And where's Docker, there's of course Kubernetes. And so, yeah, also learning Kubernetes, which is, yeah, good. And then because all this routing and retry logic and so on is getting too hard, so you pick up your service mesh like Istio or Linkerd and something like that. Yeah, you also learn that, and yeah, we're cool. And your logging solution like ElkStack, and maybe your monitoring solution like Prometheus, and probably your tracing solution like Open Tracing or Zipkin or whatever you like, and so on. And you learn all that, and eventually you mastered all that, and you feel great, and you say, yeah, I've mastered it. I'm ready for the future now. Nothing can happen to me. So yeah, let's have a party. And then some grumpy guy like I come around and say, yeah, really? Are you prepared? And the typical reaction is, oh, what? Why are you saying that? I just felt happy. And so, yeah, it's okay if you feel happy, but let's talk for a second what's probably going on. So that's my take on what's going on. So if you have a different opinion, feel free. It's perfectly fine. I just share my thoughts on that. It's part of my job, thinking about how things will move on. And so let's talk about the future. But let's first, for a minute, let's understand where we currently are and how we came here, because that's very important. So understanding IT. Again, this is gist version. The full version would be a full-day workshop, which I condensed into a talk, which was 1 hour, and then this other full version talk here already had then an extract of that, and this extract of the extract of the extract. So, but I still hope it still makes a little bit of sense. We'll figure out. So just 2 aspects. There would be more to say, but just 2 aspects here. First thing is the market that drives us, how it evolved. And there are a lot of representations. So last century, the predominant paradigm was industrial production, industrial markets. And if you shed away all the complexity from that and dive down to the basics, the core assumption of industrial markets is that demand is a lot higher than supply, which means as soon as you have figured out which is the right product to sell, which isn't too hard because there's a lot of demand. So if you're not doing it completely wrong, you're probably very likely to sell it. You have a lot of certainty. The only challenge left to you then is to scale production in a cost-efficient way. That's your way to increase your profit. So because sales is mostly safe in such, this is the core assumption of all industrial markets. Unfortunately, most markets these days are no longer this way. So this relation of demand and supply tilted, basically. So supply is a lot higher in most markets than demand, which creates a very different situation. So you do no longer know if this product is going to be sold in any way. So which gives you high degree of uncertainty. You only will figure it out if you deliver your idea out to the customer and gather feedback from the customer. they're no longer just buying because you're having a good product. They're only buying if they have a product which meets their needs and their demands best. And the only way to be successful in such a market is that you go around and continuously collect feedback from your customers, from your market, trying to figure out what's going on, what's their demands. Because the best in the market who adapt to their needs the best, these are going to push the market, creating a fast and very fast market with very high market pressure. So very different forces in there. Industrial era, cost efficiency, scalability. Post-industrial era, how I call it, is cycle times, adaptability. Very different mindset where you start off from. This also drives us in IT. I mean, let's look at IT for a second. Also, IT, starting back in the 60s, commercial software development, so with the software crisis and all that stuff, and then trying to, very selective support of the business back then. Very little computing power, report here, analysis there, and so on. And they still needed more of that, so we created software engineering, which was basically industrial production of software, so cost efficiently scaling the amount of software we were producing. But these days, software is something completely different, IT, because we holistically support the business these days. So IT has become the business nervous system. So the whole business DNA is coded into IT. You can no longer run a business without having IT. And, which is even more important, you can no longer change your business without touching IT. No future features, no new products, no new processes and all that stuff. You always have to touch IT. You say configurable systems, well, that configuration switch you need for your next product idea is most likely not there. So you have to touch IT. And it's not only that. So the role of IT, from my understanding these days, is had 4 roles. So is this nervous system of business. It's also an enabler of sometimes disruptive new business models, like think internet, think mobile, think cloud, think IoT, and all that stuff, big data and what's going on. And so it enabled very different business models. We are also becoming integral part of the business model. There's this digital transformation or digitization thing. Talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute. And it's the feedback loop medium these days. So having said that, so it's tightly interwoven with business. So we can't think about IT and business separated anymore. So they affect each other very closely. And where do we need microservices in here? Well, it's over there, post-industrial. I mean, if you really want to go fast and you think about that from an organizational point of view, we'll end up with autonomous cross-functional teams with all the skills in there that you expose out to the market forces and let them respond to that as fast as possible. The problem is they also have IT assets in there. As I said before, IT is the nervous system. And if these IT assets, the building blocks, cross several teams, then they have to coordinate all the time with each other if they want to touch anything in there. This makes them slow, this cross-coordination. So IT building blocks should not span or should not cross team boundaries. And that's basically the whole story of microservices. That's 95% of that. There's still 5% more which are very disparate non-functional requirements across different pieces of the application. But that's basically what microservices are about, the whole idea of them. And yeah, well over there. Cool. So that's where we are. And where are you going? So also a very, very short version of that. Just 2 meta trends, which are very important to understand, I think, is. The first one is that digitization or digital transformation thing. Isn't that a terrible name? It is, isn't it? I mean, we are digital for 60 years or 70 years now, since the invention of the transistor. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense. And which makes it even worse is that most people confuse the 3 waves of digitization. And so we get a perfect confusion. Very briefly looking at that. First wave was digitization of business processes. So that's going on for 40 or more years meanwhile. So it's automation of the processes, so supporting the business, which is happening. It's mostly completed, but if you still have people, I still meet customers around who say that, yeah, well, we're doing digital transformation, and right now we have a digital customer file. well, 30 years ago, that would have been cool news. But today, well, the current wave is what I think is a second wave, is digitization of business offerings themselves. So IT becoming an integral part of these business offerings. That's what we see. It started with the e-commerce business about 20 years ago, but it got an extra push with the boost with the mobile devices, because now the customers no longer have to go to the internet walks with them. It's a real game changer. Most people still haven't understood that. And so I think it's on the peak now. And the third wave that I see is starting, and most companies I see haven't even realized that. It may be a little bit different here because we're always talking about APIs in this conference here. As soon as you figure out that you have a successful business offering, digital business offering, quite usually you tend also to offer that via an API. And to be used in different business offerings. What's happening now is that these offerings go away from the supplier-driven offerings to consumer need-driven offerings, because the consumers, their needs, they don't care about banking, transportation, retail, insurance, and so on. They have different needs. They just want hassle-free mobility or something like that. They just want to have hassle-free living and all these things. The needs are very different, which has an effect that these new business offerings, the business domains of all these API providers, they dissolve somehow. This is outside their core business domains. And this has some effects that are underestimated very often. So in the second wave, you already are facing the whole uncertainty of the markets and of the customers with your business offering, because we're an integral part. So as IT, you have to deliver to your business all these important things like going fast, delivering the metrics. We just heard about that. So especially business metrics, outcomes. So how much value did you create and so on. How A/B testing, smart rollout and so on. And if you're going for the third wave, then you mostly get uncertainty to the square. You have everything from the second wave, from the post-industrial markets, plus you don't know the business domain anymore where the offerings are used, your offering is used in, and often you even don't have any direct access to the end customer anymore. So you needed this even more urgently. The second meta trend I see is customer expectations. Yeah, well, it just has to be great, adapt to their needs, be fast, always there, and all that stuff. So give me a cool experience or I'm gone. On my devices, on everything I like. And if I boil that down to IT trends, these two meta trends, I end up with basically 9 trends. We will just look at 2 of them very briefly. The first one is we have to go fast. So minimize the cycle times, accelerate the feedback loops to respond to that business model uncertainty. By the way, this is what DevOps actually is about. So if you see anybody talking about DevOps and only talking about automation, this person haven't understood DevOps by any means. So it's the idea of DevOps is how fast can I get a new idea through the whole IT value chain out to the customer and collect feedback from them. That's what DevOps is about. So it's always diff, dev, sec, test, ops, whatever. It's in the whole IT value chain. So biz DevOps is nothing new. It's DevOps. Biz SecOps is nothing new. It's DevOps. That's what DevOps is about. It's not continuous delivery, which is also important, but it's just so much about it. Anyway, we need that. And another very important trend I see is focus on front end. The battle for the customers is won in the front ends, not in the back ends. Back ends are becoming commodity. They just have to work. They just don't have to come into the way of the front ends. By the way, if talking about APIs, that's also true for APIs, but I'm not talking about the API implementation. I talk about how the customers, your users, experience your API. How good is it documented? How easy is it to use? How consistent is it? Is there a playground? Are there examples and all that stuff? Experience, not implementation. Implementation is commodity. Experience is king. Different story. So, okay. Present, future. What the heck are we going to do with microservices now? Yeah. So My take on microservices, they're a transitional step. I mean, we use them to speed up, to support this organizational autonomy. And that's what's important. This is cool, and we need that. But they come at a price, and the price is high. They're really hard to master. They're distributed by default, and distributed systems are hard. I think there are only two hard things in whole IT. This is security and distribution. And from what I've seen in the last 35 years, about 99% of all people in IT haven't understood either security or distribution. It's really hard to master. I'm dealing with distributed systems for about 25 years meanwhile, and I start to get an idea. I haven't mastered them yet, not by far. And I really spend a lot of time trying to understand these beasts. So they're hard, and we need a lot more support to run them correctly and a lot more tooling, and we talked about that in the beginning, and we have to master all that stuff and get it in our brains. And we haven't solved any business problem yet, so we need all that just to make it work somehow. No business logic in there yet. And this is often very overstraining. I mean, we have to solve business problems, and all this accidental complexity came along. And quite often what I see is then we're not going faster with them. After a while, we're going slower with them, or we try to keep up the pace, and this has an even worse effect because then quite often we do no longer have just a ball of mud in our code base, but we also have a ball of mud in production. So it's brittle over there and brittle over there, and yeah, which isn't a good experience at all. So what we need to have is we need to reduce our intellectual overload in some way. We still need to go fast. We've seen that. There's no way around that. And we need to reduce intellectual overload in the back end, which becomes commodity. And my idea, if I look around and say, how can we reduce intellectual overload? I think it's serverless. And if I say serverless, don't think about function as a service. That's just 5% of that. It's the managed services which make the difference. It starts at the infrastructure level. I get all the infrastructure pieces, backend as a service, and so on. I don't need to buy them. I don't need to install them. I don't need to configure them. I don't need to run them. I don't have to understand all their subtle details in there, how it all works together. I don't have to check the CVEs and install the security patches and all that. Somebody else does that for me. Okay, relief of, so I don't have to care about that. Less intellectual overload. Deployment, production tools. I don't set up any Jenkins pipelines anymore. I buy them from the cloud, from wherever I get them. Same, and that's very interesting, business logic. So all the companies tell me, we are so unique, we are so special. And I've seen a lot of domains, I've seen a lot of companies in my business career, and sorry to say that, no, you're not. So yes, you have your special pieces in there. These are 10 or 20% at best. In bigger enterprises, they're 2 or 5% usually. The rest is quite the same everywhere. And most of the stuff you can buy as services these days, as business services. Even complete CRM solutions, and they're made for integration. There's no longer an SAP or Siebel or anything like that, which says, buy me and don't have anything beside me anymore, and I don't care how you integrate with me. It's built for integration. You can have them. So you no longer need to understand how they work in detail and run them. And function as a service, it's a thin integration layer on top of that. Okay, a few services, or a bit that rest of the business logic, if you think about that, yeah, don't do that with functions. You will end up in a mess of functions, at least these days. So we will still need a few microservices in there, or other kind of services. But you don't run them in the traditional way. You create managed services which run on managed schedulers. So AWS Fargate shows you the way. The idea of that is so that you just create a highly standardized container already provided by your deployment tool chain. And so the base image and all that. And you just say, here's a trigger when I need that, and you fire a scheduler, you take care about the rest. So like the AWS Lambda scheduler is doing it these days. and no understanding, lots of details about Kubernetes and so on. So it will just vanish. And so you're able to reduce your intellectual overload a lot and focus on what really needs to be done, and you're able to go fast. Consequences? Yeah, well, you have to really to understand. All this tooling, which you ever looked into the Kubernetes tooling at the moment, it's overwhelming what's out there. So it's about 20 tools that you have to understand to only use Kubernetes. I think it mostly will become irrelevant across the next years. Knowing the managed service offerings, that becomes relevant over the next years. And still you need to understand the underlying concepts. And as I said before, the overall backend development will become a little bit less relevant. So yeah, so we can focus on those things which are really essential in there. And we still can go fast. So my take on that is microservices will mostly dissolve into serverless over time. I'm not perfectly sure how long the time will be, and probably depending on the business you're in, how much pressure you experience from the market side and so on, it might take a little bit longer or shorter. So, but if Amazon comes to your town, probably you will end up there a lot sooner than later. Amazon just as an example. Is it all perfect in the world of serverless? No, of course not. Can it improve? Yes, it's a quite young technology. But I think that's the way it will develop over time. It becomes more and more mature every single day. And so I think we shouldn't, as developers, we shouldn't look so much anymore into what's in the Apache incubator, but rather see what's on AWS reInvent, what's a new announcement. AWS reInvent, again, just as an example for cloud service offerings. So take your favorite provider. And if you just think log in now, ask me the question later at the Q&A. It's an orthogonal concern. And for you, before I now finish up, yeah, it's about time, I guess. Two last recommendations, no matter if you agree with my point of view or not, about what's important for the future. I think what's really important is understand post-industrial markets, really understand the concept of uncertainty, because it changes everything. Everything, organization-wide, process-wide, technology-wide, and all that stuff. And what I see around, most people haven't got it. They still think in industrial terms, cost efficiency and so on. But this cost efficiency is important, but it's not your single most important driver anymore. The single most important driver is to gather quick feedback, because that helps you to understand where you can money, where you don't make money, where you even lose money, and cut those things off as soon as possible. And the last thing is, I would like to mention is the design wisdom, the timeless design wisdom. So this is, especially if you're an architect or something like that, becomes more and more important, the foundations of good design. It's important not only anymore for good understandable changeability and extensibility for the code, but it also affects usability and acceptance on the API level a lot if you get the design right there, and it highly affects robustness, availability, and scalability at runtime in distributed system landscapes. So it is really becoming a game changer. So no matter if you like my take or not, maybe that's a good way to do if you're on the IT level and not on the pure management level. Well, we talked about that. We talked about that. And I think that should be it. Thanks a lot for your time.